Some experts on public policy are trying a new way to convert their ideas into political practice, working together as a local chapter of the Scholars Strategy Network. They recently got together with legislators at the State House. The event was about the contribution of female legislators and how their political gains can make a difference. Our guest is one of the participants. She's an associate professor of government and chair of the Government Department at Suffolk University. We'd like to welcome Rachel Cobb. Thanks so much for being with us, Rachel.
My pleasure.
First of all, in a way, I think people in academia who are very politically engaged have been doing this for a while. So what's different about what you're doing with the network?
Well, what we're trying to do is take people out of their zones. So policymakers are in their zones, scholars are in their zones, and we're trying to connect the two. And instead of having the scholars say, boy, I wish they'd take our ideas, we're saying, you've got to take your ideas to the policymakers, and we're providing the conduit so they can get to the policymakers.
Well, you want to change the conduit, but you also want to change the people you're talking to when you get to the State House. And I was thinking about the Boston delegation. When it comes to the number of women, we've been sort of plateauing, I guess.
Yeah, overall in Massachusetts, we don't have the best track record compared to other states. We have about 25% of our legislature. Colorado has 40%. However, North Carolina has 10%. So, I'm sorry, South Carolina. So we're doing better than they are. But overall, in the national scene, in Congress, women make up only 20% of members of Congress. So it's low, and it hasn't inched up in a long time.
What about the difference that at least the number of women we've seen so far have made, or even some individual elected officials? Anything that you point to that?
Yeah, there's a really good example right now, that a bill that just recently passed the Massachusetts Senate. And this is, I don't know if you've received in the mail your explanation of benefits from your health insurance company. That explanation of benefits letter, when it comes to the House, goes to the person who is the insurance holder. And the challenge with that is that sometimes people in a household don't want other people in a household to know what they've been doing with their confidential health information. And so this bill will take that mailer and make sure that it goes to the person who had the care rather than to the person who is the insurance holder. They may be the same person, but if they are different. And that's because for women, they may live in an abusive household, and so this confidential information protects them. They may have reproductive issues that they do not want to discuss with their partner or with other members of their family. So for those reasons, and this is a bill that was sponsored by women, and having those voices at the table, they just approach policy sometimes from a slightly different perspective and will bring that expertise to the table.
One thing I've noticed is that having a higher profile for women in politics, which means people in office are involved in campaigns, it changes the way men act. I mean, there were men giving attention to issues that 20 years ago no one was talking about.
Absolutely. In fact, just the other day, I was listening to a story about the fact that, in fact, in many communities, people are talking a lot about paid sick leave. And this is an issue that is bubbling up across the country, and yet Congress isn't talking about it. And there seemed to be this scratching of their heads of, why is that? Well, I think why that is that many of the members of Congress not only are male, but they are older and not necessarily coping with the same genuine challenges that American families and younger folks are.
In other words, if you're taking care of
with
little kids or aging parents, that you're paying attention to that.
That's right, and you've got your hands full with that. And you may not be able to have all of the time in the world to demand change from your policymakers.
Well, what about the reasons why the number of women in office is not getting higher, or even maybe, who knows, the number of people trying? What's going on there? What needs to be done differently?
Well, some interesting studies have been done about why women run for office, and they need to be asked 7 times to finally decide that they might be okay about doing it. There is some amount of anxiety about running, and they also are juggling many issues, and so sometimes it's hard for them to conceive of even having the time for it. And when they do run, they have to make twice as many phone calls as men do to raise the same amount of money. So it is an uphill battle for them. And the other thing that we've found is that the very polarized environment of politics right now, the very aggressive and toxic world, has made it off-putting to women, and they have decided that maybe their talents are better used in other arenas. The challenge is that the only way to change the arena is to get into it.
Well, a lot of people don't come into politics from the get-go. They sometimes they go from one kind of community engagement or public engagement. They volunteer, they serve on a board. What about that option for getting women into politics?
Well, most certainly women are participating in all of those activities. What happens, though, sort of socially, is that men tend to say to themselves and also to each other, hey, why don't you run? But it's less likely that they go to women and say, hey, why don't you run? And so it's kind of getting over that hump of ensuring not only that many people are being asked, but in the case of women, that they're being asked multiple times and nudged a little to say, well, you can do it.
Well, one thing that's also interesting is what's going on now about the wage gap. And people have been talking about that for years, but there's something different about the way people are coming at it now.
Certainly, there's something different. I think at this point, there is, on the part of some advocacy organizations, a kind of coalescing to say this wage gap has persisted. I mean, it first appeared as an issue back in the 60s, and it really hasn't nudged up that much. And so there is, I think we have reached a point where there are enough women in power who have decided enough is enough, that they have rallied the troops around the country and at all levels. I mean, it is, there are pushes at the municipal level, at the state level, and calls for it at the federal level, though I don't.
Of course, there are also the ways you strategize around it, because in the most simple form, it's women complaining because they're getting less pay for comparable work. But on the other hand, these women, a lot of them are in families, so it affects other people in the families, and then you ripple out to the community. So there's a strategy you can build around that.
That's right. And in fact, the women, as many of them are, the single breadwinner in their households, and so is having a deteriorating effect on the family and the family's economic prospects.
Well, I also know that you're plugged into the network with a lot of interesting research. So if people want to find out more, what's the best way to look that up?
Well, they can Google the Scholar Strategy Network, and there is also a wonderful podcast that Scholar Strategy Network now has called No Jargon, and you can find that in the Apple iTunes Store.
All right, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Rachel Cobb from Suffolk University.